Well, hello, everybody. My name is John Goglia, and it really is a pleasure for me to be here at this IA renewal session. I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about my past and what I have seen. I don't know how many of you have seen me on my podcast and YouTube channel where we cover, Greg Fife and I cover accidents, incidents, and all things aviation. And we typically don't pull any punches. And we call them the way we see them. Maybe we're not always right, but that's the way we see them, and we'll stand by what we say. And by way of background, I have been an A&P for a very long time. And I have worked in general aviation. I've worked in for the airlines. I've worked in the charter business aviation. So I have a wealth of experience, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And today I want to share with you some of the things that I have seen. Now, I failed to mention that I spent 2 terms as a board member for the National Transportation Safety Board. So I've been deeply involved with accidents involving all modes of transportation. And the NTSB does not only airplanes, but they do trains and buses and trucks and boats, pipelines, and tunnels and bridges is one that most people don't even consider to be part of our transportation network, but it is. So the NTSB really gets into a lot of things. And while I was there, I certainly did get into a lot of things. But I found the period of time that I was there, we had an awful lot of unfortunate aviation events that keep me busy. And I'm going to talk about a few of them from a maintenance point of view, not so much the broad view that the NTSB has, but the maintenance point of view, because there's some disturbing trends that I see going on out there. And I don't see them getting any better in the near future. Now, all of you that run an IA business, because that's what you are, you're a small business, most of you, and you have customers to deal with, you have to invoicing to do, you have collections of money that sometimes very difficult to get out of people who own airplanes. And they complain about what they have to pay a mechanic to work on an airplane, but they don't complain much about who's working on their Mercedes or BMW. But that's another story for another day. The IA folks, all of you in the general aviation side of IA, you are the backbone of our business. You are really the people, the front row, and you can impact on the negative side of our business considerably. And by that, I mean the accidents and the incidents. It's not in your best interest to have your customers crack up their airplane and then you lose the business. Or worse yet, if they crash the airplane and you lose the airplane and the customer. So it's in our best interest, all of our best interests, to produce a good product and help aviation along. I mentioned to you about my podcast and the YouTube channel. One of the things that I have found in doing the research for those, we go through many, many, many accident reports from all kinds of different sources, not just the NTSB. And there's some common threads that keep coming up. And I keep looking for the ones in the maintenance department. Now, when you look at an accident and the NTSB gives you a probable cause, that's their version of probable cause. It's the ones most focused on that. But for maintenance, we're not always included in those findings. And I attribute that somewhat to the fact that there's very few people with real working experience as an A&P at the NTSB. In fact, for the past 20 years, there's been nobody. And it's usually engineers and pilots. And those of us who have had to interface with engineers realize that even the engineers oftentimes don't realize what's going on out in the field and what we have to do to get their products back in shape. So all those challenges really wear upon all of us maintenance people or you folks as IAs. And you've got to pick up sometimes after some pretty egregious previous maintenance that you may come across. Either it's pilot done or some of the mechanic problems. Now today, in today's environment, with what happened after the pandemic, we are really in a very unique place, and it's not for the better. You know, we have this pilot shortage, and we're cranking out pilots as fast as we can. They're not as good as pilots used to be. Now, maybe they will get there, but because we're cranking them out quickly, there's problems. And some of the problems are systemic. Just think for a minute. The airlines and business aviation are sucking up every pilot they can get their hands on. So if you got a CFI out there who's been drumming along, building his own time by flying other students and teaching them how to fly, they've got a fair amount of time usually, and they've been sucked up by the regionals and the airlines like a great big vacuum cleaner. They're non-existent anymore. So who's teaching our pilots today? Well, we're being taught by pilots that are themselves not very much experienced. They haven't been around the horn as much as we've had in the past. And it's beginning to show in the pilot community. Well, similar things that happen in the maintenance community. We fortunately we're growing. I forget what the bottom number was, but we had shrunk our aviation school population down to the low 100s, 120, 130. I forget exactly what the number was, but it's down that low. And now, because of what's been going on, it's growing to close to 300. In fact, tomorrow, I know this is being recorded, but tomorrow I am off to do a speech at an opening of another A&P school. So I'm happy to say that we're getting a lot of A&P schools back on track, but we're still producing as many as we can as quickly as we can. And that's causing some problems with experience and knowledge. And these people being grabbed up by everybody. The airlines have already cleaned out a lot of the GA ranks and a lot of the business aviation ranks of experienced mechanics because of the rates of pay that their compensation that they're giving today is quite high. It makes me want to open my toolbox again. But the problem is that we've got a lot of people that are weak in the business. And as I age, you're going to see the end of that. You're going to be on the wrong side of that curve. And you're going to be picking up the pieces of work that wasn't done properly. And boy, let me tell you, as I go through these reports and I go through incidents from the FAA, there's a lot of maintenance mistakes. And I've seen a lot of those in accidents. So, and we're going to talk about a few of those today. There's one other thing that I want to mention to you as IAs, that you can have a direct impact on the accident rate in flying that we have today. You know, you have interface, those of you on the general aviation side, you interface directly with the pilot, with the customer. One of the things that the research that I've done for the podcast has shown is that the pilots don't understand what they're looking for on a pre-flight. And I find it over and over and over again that they just don't understand fully what they're looking at. And they do a walk around. And I know there's some pilots that do a lousy walk around. I actually did a survey myself, visual survey, watching people in general aviation and corporate doing their walk arounds. And it's scary. It really is scary because they're just not looking at the airplane. On the general aviation side, I keep telling people that will listen to me that you should be touching the airplane. You should be wiggling your flight controls. You should be doing things. But you know, one of the basic things that they don't know, they don't even look for, is the connections on their flight controls. Right? cotter pins that are missing, nuts that are loose, basic things that you can see from doing a walk around on the airplane. And I'm going to talk at length about an accident that was directly caused by that, by a pilot not being able to recognize the missing cotter pin and a nut that was slowly backing off and caused a problem in plain view. Didn't even have to open a panel, didn't have to do anything. It was right out there in the breeze. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But getting back to the point of how you can impact that. When you have the pilots in to pick up the airplane going out, ask them if they know how to, if they'd like to go over and review what a good visual inspection of the airplane is, what a good walk around entails. And if you would start doing that, that is going to have a direct effect on the accident rate, a direct one, because it's just coming up over and over and over where things could have been averted if the pilots recognized the problem when they did their walk around. And I'll transition into that right now. So I was going to talk some more about it, but it's just going to be more of the same. On the screen, you can see I have a picture of this is a flight control off of Mooney. This airplane crashed. And you can see that stud down below. That was on the right-hand elevator. And it became disconnected in flight. We found no nut and no damage, no cotter pin and no damage. Those threads on that were not stripped. There's no excessive wear in the hole where the cotter pin went. This airplane had some painting done to it previously, and that's a good place to suspect when it was cotter pin was not installed. When they put the nut on and didn't install the cotter pin, but it could have fallen out. Admittedly, I mean, it does happen. It shouldn't, but it does happen occasionally. Somebody maybe have reused it, but a sharp-eyed walk around would have caught it. But not only a sharp-eyed walk around, as the sequence on this goes, I'm going to give it to you right now. I think it'll jump right out at you. All right, so this airplane was based in Minnesota. This pilot was experienced, a doctor, mostly retired, and he liked to fly. And he had built quite a few hours. He had a hangar mate with him that he would fly with. And he was actually flying under the hood quite a bit because he wanted his instrument rating. And so he would fly with his pilot, and they would go out all the time. VFR didn't matter. He throw the hood on and just fly instruments. So on this particular day, it's the day of the crash, he is in his little airport and he goes up to fuel at the self-service fuel farm, which is right outside the I'll call it the main terminal of this FBO. And he had occasion to talk to the airport manager, who was also a pilot, and also had given this particular Mooney captain his biannual just a week earlier. So they were very familiar with one another. And they're talking after he got his fuel, and he told the airport manager that something wrong with his autopilot. The airplane's a little squirrely. And he was going to take the airplane after he fueled it. He's going to take it down to the other end of the field, short distance, and have maintenance look at it. And he did just that. He went in. And this particular maintenance facility on this airport was a mechanical facility. Just did mechanical airframe and power plant work. And he came in and he mentioned that he thought he had an autopilot problem because the airplane was squirrely. Now, we've all seen it where pilots will do their own troubleshooting and then lead you down the path to what their troubleshooting determined. And we all know, and we all should be on guard, that we really need to do the troubleshooting ourselves. but that's not always the case. And in this case, the shop was busy. They listened to him. They had done some work on this airplane before. They listened to him. And since they didn't do the avionics work, any avionics work at this facility, they told them so, and if they couldn't help them. They never went out and looked at the airplane. They never independently made an assessment of what the pilot was saying. So they just accepted what he said, told him that they didn't do avionics work, and that was the end of it, essentially. And away he went. Well, he went off and picked up his passengers, 2 other doctors. So now we have an airplane with 3 doctors on it, and they're going a relatively short flight. I forget, I think it's an hour and a half at the most. And away they go. Well, when they get to their destination, by the way, there was an avionics shop at this location they were going to, and he knew that. When they get there, it has a low layer of clouds over the airport, and he descends down through it. Well, he no sooner gets in the clouds and he loses control of the airplane, and it crashes. Just, a little bit short of the airport, not on the threshold, but short of the airport runway. And they all perish. And the NTSB comes out, NTSB does their investigation, and just by a strange set of circumstances, Greg Fife and I actually get called by the family members to take a look at the accident and what went on. Now, this is a couple of months later. And while the NTSB is doing their thing for their investigation, Greg and I go out and we talk to the first responders, we talk to the police, the fire, we visit the crash scene. We start doing independent investigation of this accident. And not to the same level that the NTSB normally does, but we're looking for the detail. And part of what we do is we go up to the airport that he left from, trying to find out some facts. And in talking to the airport manager, that's where I got what I said to you a minute ago about him stopping and talking to the airport manager, telling him he had a problem with the airplane, and he was going to take it down to the maintenance hangars further down on the hangar side of the airport and talk to maintenance about his airplane. And after we talked to him, we went down to the hangar and talked to those people, and that's where we found out about the maintenance thing. And I looked through the records. They let me look through the records for the airplane and so on. So now we have a basic understanding of it, and we go down on the way back. We go to the accident site and talk to the police, and we actually have to talk to the first responders. We got fortunate that the same people that were there happened to be on duty that day, and we talked to them, and they had some great pictures of the condition of the accident site and the surrounding areas beforehand. And one of their pictures showed some pieces of the airplane away from the accident site. Now, one of the things that you do in accident investigation is if it's a good investigation, you always go back in the directions the airplane came from to see if anything has come off. You ask the first responders, you ask people in the neighborhood. You should have already done your 4 corners of the investigation. That is the area that's contained. And you want to make sure you catch any pieces that may have fallen off early. Why? Because things that leave airplanes early often tell you a story about what went on. And in this case, there was several reports from different people, not just the first responders and the police. There were several reports of people seeing pieces fall into the water. There was a small lake or a large pond not too far from the crash site. And there was debris that fell on some houses, which people, not needless to say, reported to the police. And one of them was the right-hand elevator on this airplane. And that's the picture that we're looking at right now. And in the pictures from those first responders, we can see the stud down there below bent. And again, no damage to the threads, no cotter pin, no nut. So from the flight aware information, we now know, we looked, and we know that the airplane was behaving rather strangely after it entered into the clouds. Now, you know, if you don't have bad luck, you wouldn't have any luck. And in this case, the bad luck was the airplane on approach to the airport, when he's close to the ground, this nut decides to leave the airplane, and the elevator starts flapping around, making the airplane uncontrollable. And that led to the crash. But the NTSB didn't pick up on any of that, so it's gone. When you go look at an airplane, not the crash airplane, when you go look at a Mooney and walk around, I walk around it just like a mechanic always does, and I've done thousands and thousands of times on all kinds of airplanes. You're always looking at the airplane. You're always looking at things. And as we went around doing the walk around, I looked and saw this attachment point hanging right out there in the breeze. I mean, you could see it clear as day. How he missed that this was loose tells me he never touched the airplane. He never shook the ailerons, never physically touched any part of his airplane to see if anything was unusual. Now, a pilot that would go out the first time, he wouldn't notice what's unusual. But as you start doing this day after day after day, like we would do as maintenance people, you get to know, you get the second nature, you know what wiggle is, and you know what too much wiggle is, or not enough wiggle sometimes. All right, so he missed it. And him missing it essentially was a fatal error on his part. Now, did it contribute? You know, when we talked to the maintenance person in the shop, they felt pretty bad that they didn't go out to the airplane. They felt, you know, maybe they could have done something else that would have made it better, but they didn't. And you know what? Sometimes we get caught in situations like that. I'm going to move on now on subjects. Let me just check here. All right, so my pitch to all of you was to, if you get the chance, try to educate your customers on pre-flights. You could save their life and save you a lot of emotional angst. You know, those mechanics that I talked about in that facility there, since they didn't touch the airplane, they were a little bit removed from it. I've worked accidents where maintenance was directly involved, and I've seen the people just destroyed. I know of a couple of mechanics of one that occurred. I'm in New England, right here in New England, and they left aviation. They emotionally, they were basket cases. I was with the NTSB. We were able to convince the company to get them some help, small company, to get them some help to deal with those events. But it is very, very challenging. And I've got a lot of stories on challenging for maintenance people. They weren't at the crash scene, but they worked on the airplane. I actually have one individual that didn't even work on the airplane, on the subject area of the airplane, but he did work on the airplane, and he blamed himself. Not uncommon, not uncommon. I have an expanded presentation I do where I talk about all of that involving commercial aviation accidents. And it's for me to see a brother mechanic in that kind of pain, it's painful for me as well. It's just, it could have been you, you know, that's the saying of the grace of God, it could have been me. Well, it could have been any of us over and over and over because of what we do. We all know that the job we do comes with a lot of burdens, But I'll tell you, that is a very heavy burden. If you've been involved in an accident that involves some fatalities, and that you think you had a role to play in the event. Now let me see if I can do this without screwing this up. All right, so in the theme of the cotter pins, I want to share this one with you. This is what's left of a DC-8 that crashed in California. And of all places to crash, in the fancy word, the automotive recycling or salvage yard. Most of my generation was a junkyard. And you can see here what it went through. Now, can you imagine, just imagine for a second, that you're an investigator and you show up with this and see this. And then you get there, and these are pictures that our investigators were involved with. The day the crash was in the very early morning and very late at night, depending on which way you look at it. And it was still burning in the morning. And you have to try to recover the engine, airframe parts, engine parts from the boneyard. And you can see here, jet engine inside a pickup truck, one of the engines. So it was considerable damage and very difficult to separate airplane parts from automobile parts. So it was quite a challenge for us. And because of the circumstances of this accident, being very similar to another DC-8 crash that occurred earlier in Miami, everybody assumed it was a freighter, assumed that it was a freight shift that the freight went aft on takeoff, upset the weight and balance, and the airplane was unflyable. And we know it was unflyable because they tried to come back to the airport and they struggled and struggled and they couldn't quite make it. All right, so as the investigation progressed, the flight data recorder folks in the laboratory in Washington, D.C. started to extract from it the parameters of the flight controls. This airplane, when you move the flight controls, the yoke in the cockpit, it'll tell you, nose up, nose down, ailerons left or right. And so they were tracking it. And then one of the people in the lab decided to compare it with the Fine Air crash. It was the one in Miami. And nothing agreed. All the flight control inputs by the crew did not agree with the known load shift in Miami. So that started putting doubts into the load shift. And then just so happened, in my past, I owned a company that loaded and unloaded airplanes. And I made a visit to the loading company, the loading people, and had extensive discussions with them about loading this particular airplane. I actually talked to the people who loaded the airplane that crashed. And I also had strong feelings that this wasn't a load shift. And soon we figured out that it wasn't. The NTSB figured out that it wasn't a load shift. So that meant we had to look elsewhere. The maintenance records disclosed that this airplane had some work done to it, a heavy maintenance visit down in Tennessee for one, and that was about a month to 6 weeks earlier. And that's by memory, so the dates might be off a little bit, but it was earlier. And then it had some maintenance done to it just a very short time before the crash. And it was a dampener, the elevated dampener back in the horizontal stabilizer. Now on the DC-8, sometimes you can get that dampener out without any other additional work. And sometimes you have to take the elevator, loose, drop it down. And this is how you do it. This is the actuator for the right hand elevator. And typically you would just unhook it here and the elevator could drop down beyond its normal travel, and you could get this actuator out. And that's exactly what this young kid did. And let me talk about that young kid for a minute. Young mechanic. At the time of the accident, he had his A&P license for a whopping 3 months, roughly. Worked as a contract mechanic for about a month, and then got hired by this company to work. Now, he's working on this airplane because it's a cargo airplane. Those of you who may be familiar with that side of the business, cargo airplanes operate at night, and they don't operate on the weekend. They usually come in on a Saturday and go to bed until Monday, or they go off on additional charters. But the scheduled freight business is usually over on Saturday morning and doesn't pick up again until Monday night. So that's when a lot of maintenance is done, and that's when this individual was doing the maintenance, and he was working alone. So, you know, everybody likes to have the weekend off, and he was working alone. So I believe he must have had some direction from somebody for him to know this would not necessarily be intuitive to somebody with so little experience to go disconnect this, but it could have. It could have. So anyway, it was disconnected. He replaced the dampener and put the airplane back together. Well, what had happened is that in the accident, these pieces that were recovered, this is not from the accident airplane. The pieces that were recovered are badly burnt, but the bolt, nut, and cotter pin were not found in the area that under the cover, right? So because it's pretty much captive right here. They were not found with the piece at the site, the accident site. And this is another airplane that we went and took apart. And so that was a suspect. You know, was the cotter pin left off? What happened? Did he even have the nut on it? That'll always remain an unknown. Right? And here's another picture of it. And the reason why, and this is not the greatest picture, but because of the way the airplane, the linkage is quite a bit forward, the push rod attaches quite a bit forward, and it comes back. This rod end has a little 15 or 20 degree bend in it right in here. It's undercut in this area. So to keep it lined up, and it's push pull straight with no side load. Now, one of the things that we had in the logbook several times was a pilot write-up about the elevators feel heavy. And it was looked at, including the day before this accident. The airplane came in at like 10 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. It sat all day. It had that write-up in the logbook, the elevators feel heavy. The single mechanic at this location went out and looked at it, and he couldn't figure out anything. He did a visual inspection, didn't open anything, did a visual inspection, couldn't see anything, and they just were continuing on with it. And away it went. Well, then we had the accident. So now we have this issue of why is the elevator feeling heavy? Is there a problem with the dampener, or what could it be? So when I finally looked at it, at these pieces, and I saw that angle that this rod end had, I called my friends. You know, being in the business as long as I am, I have a lot of people I can talk to. I called them at the repair facility and asked for a favor. They had an airplane in for heavy maintenance. I asked them to go out and disconnect this rod, turn it 180 degrees, reconnect it. And well, first I said, go out with a fish scale and give a tug on the yoke and see what kind of force it takes. And then go reverse this yoke and go do that test again. And they did it. And the force was considerably different. Again, by memory, I think it was something like 40 pounds different from in the feel. So that could have been the reason why we had that write-up about them feeling heavy. But I also concerned about this young mechanic and what he could have done and why it came apart. Now, when it came apart, the problem was the airplane was nose heavy at that time. The pilots could not keep the nose up. No matter how much a nose up they pulled in, they couldn't get it up. What had happened is, and this is a good picture of that, when it finally became disconnected, the aileron drooped down, like I said, that they did to remove the dampener. It fell down and the rod end jammed it. So now you have the rod end pushing that one elevator nose down, and the airplane always looking to descend. And meanwhile, they couldn't pull it up because it's jamming the other side as well. So they struggled with engine power to keep the nose putting excessive amounts of power on to force the nose up. But it was a situation where you just couldn't manage it. You're too close to the ground, not enough time, and the outcome was. But I struggled with this personally, with this one. You know, what happened? Why is this happening? So again, with my friends in the business, I had a entire horizontal stabilizer with the trim sent to the NTSB. This is our laboratories in Washington, which this piece is huge. Those of you who know what DC-8 is, huge. And a lot of people were not happy with me for bringing this big piece in. It was quite a chore even getting it in the building. And here I am, I'm taking the fairing off. And taking a look, we have the linkage in here. In fact, I still have all the linkage. We have all the linkage in here. And that's how we made a real good determination of those angles that I talked about with the rod end. And in order to observe what was going on, we actually at one point cut holes in the fairing so that we could see what was going on. Now, this is the point I want all of you to remember. When we were in A&P school, and I still remember this, there was a piece on hardware that said when you put a bolt into something on the airplane, if it's not specified in the manual, and of course, all of you as IAs don't have the best manuals in the world, and when you put it in, the head of the bolt should be towards the center of the airplane going outward. If it's an up and down vertical bolt, then the bolt head should be on the top. And those are obvious reasons. Centrifugal force trying to take the bolt away from the center of the airplane in a roll, the bolt head would be keeping the bolt in. If it's up, coming down vertically, gravity would help keep the bolt in place if the nut became separated from it. It's a common sense item, but we know common sense is not common. And went down. Well, this fairing was designed in such a way that if that bolt was installed with the head towards the center of the airplane, with the nut and cotter pin on the outboard side, that piece of hardware, that bolt, could not escape capture from that yoke. Go back. From that yoke, it could not escape capture going inboard, going in towards the fuselage, because it would contact the fairing and the fairing would hold it in place. It was designed as a failsafe. But because this young mechanic put it in the opposite way, we believe, put it in the opposite way, it allowed it to be disconnected. Now, common sense told us he had to put it in wrong because it couldn't escape because of the fairing. But, you know, governments being what they are, sometimes they weren't prepared to go that far and say that. But I see it, and I'm asking all of you to pay attention to the way it does. Now, the way the hardware is installed. Now, just as an aside, I have been slowly asking A&P schools as I visit them if they still teach that. And guess what? A lot of them don't. It's not so clear in the manuals for the schools. It's not clear in the FARs exactly where it is. So it's surprising. So I'm just raising your awareness to all of that. Right? You're the IAs. You are the center of knowledge in the general aviation community. I mean, you got your IA because you have the experience. You haven't had any problems with the FAA or with job completion. You guys are the salt of the earth, so to speak, our earth, the aviation earth. And, you know, and my philosophy is we are our brother's keeper. So keep your eye out for that. You know, let people know if you find a mistake like that. All right, now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here because this is something else that we all do as well. This is an F-100 on landing in Pittsburgh. Give you a shot. The right landing gear had a problem. And like I said earlier, I'm looking at the clock here and I'm running out of time actually. I said earlier, whenever an airplane, something happens, go back the direction it came. So here's the airplane up here, is a little fuzzy, and we're back. And here's one of the touchdown point for that airplane. And it's obvious he touched down and he had a problem pretty quickly upon touchdown. So that's a pretty clear indication of a pre-existing condition. All right, here is the landing gear as it was torn apart. This is a shimmy dampener, which is pivotal in what I'm going to tell you. And here's where, because of the shimmy, it ripped the piece right off the landing gear. Now that is significant metal right there, just ripped it off. Now in flight testing, the F-100, when during certification, it didn't have this shimmy dampener here. And they did exactly what this did, tore this at the manufacturing level, tore the landing gear apart. So they installed the shimmy dampener. Now, what had happened here, the airplane had been in for maintenance. It was in for days and days, not just an overnight. And one mechanic needed to replace the shimmy dampener, and he pulled it off, and they were waiting for a replacement. Replacement came in, and I think it was 2 days later, but again, don't hold me to that. And so another guy gets it and goes out to put it in. And there's two spaces to go with this. And he's got them in his hand, so he told me. And he could see the difference. One's longer than the other. So he went over to the manual and got the part numbers for the two spaces and went into the stock room to look at them because they were called out in the parts manual for position. And they were not in stock, so he didn't have them. So he went out to the airplane and looked at it, looked at the opposite side, and it was pretty obvious one was bigger than the other. So that's the way he installed them. Now, I actually went out to an airplane myself and looked at it, and I agreed with him. That's what I would have done. Well, it was wrong. Looks can be deceiving, and it was wrong. And he put them in that way, put it together, and within just a couple of days, the shimmy that the airplane was experiencing tore the landing gear apart. So it behooves us to pay attention to what goes on. If you don't have it in the manuals, and the reason why I even put this in here is under the landing gear manual for the airplane, which goes to the overhaul shops, it clearly identified those spaces and where they belong. But in the, I'll call it boiled down, the compressed version that they give to maintenance, line maintenance, and C-checks maintenance, it wasn't called out. So that is a big problem. So we need to pay attention. All of us need to pay attention and don't assume anything. Now, I'm going to go quickly because I only have a few more minutes, but this one is important. All right, this is ValueJet in the Everglades. This is it. They had many accidents, so I'll just call it in the Everglades. And here's our people walking through the swamp looking for pieces of the airplane. It was quite an adventure for everybody involved. After it was a recovery instead of a rescue, because nobody was found alive. This is the pieces that came into the collection area in a hangar in Miami. This is sorting through them. An interesting process. Eyewitnesses told us that it just was flying along and nosed over, so we thought it was a flight control problem. So we went to great lengths to get the flight controls. After a little while, we've been finding so much material burnt. It started to determine that we actually had a fire in the forward baggage bin. The voice recorder gave us some information on that and put it together. Now this piece, this is at the cargo door, this is a stainless steel, like a threshold. In order to get stainless steel, this is hardened. To bend like this, you need to have over 2,000 degrees. So that's how hot this fire was. There was a couple of tires in there. This one that blew. This caused us a lot of trouble to figure out the way it blew. That's not cut, that was blown out. The tire people told us it was pressurized. You weren't supposed to ship it with pressure in it. And as soon as they said that at one of the meetings at the NTSB, I said, I know exactly what's going on. When they load these tires in the belly of a DC-9, there's two ribs that go down the side. If the tire is inflated, it'll just slide down those metal strips. If it's not inflated, you gotta manually lift it and move it. So the ramp guys, the guys that load the airplane, always fill the tires up. I have another story to go with that, but just leave it there for now. Rims, I was an inspector for a while. I never saw a rim bent like this. It had to be hot enough to make the metal malleable, because this is so hard it just breaks. Put a load on it, it breaks. This is the control cable. This is what happens when you take 7x19 and stretch it. It pulls apart like this. This is out of the airplane. You see it's all bent like a melted, like a straw. Then when you're in a bar and you pull the straw apart with a match. So we knew it was hot. Here's the oxygen generators. And I'm not going to dwell on all this. This is how the oxygen generator fires. When they tell you when the mask drops down to pull the cords, this is where you pull it. You pull this pin out of the way. It's like a hammer on a revolver. This thing slams down on this primer and it starts the chemical process to produce oxygen. This is how you protect it in shipping. You got a plastic cap that's safety pinned in place so that if this should pull, the pin can't strike it with enough force to make it start. This is how you ship them. This is all part of the accident. This is the box, those standoffs, these yellow standoffs keep the can from touching the box because the can gets hot enough to ignite the box. These boxes is chemically treated, so they don't start to burn until, I forget, it was 600 or 700 degrees. Regular cardboard starts to burn at 400. The can is 5 to 550, so it's chemically treated to be higher than the temperature of the can. And that's the last one in that stream, and we're out of trouble. I'm out of pictures, but the whole reason why I put this one in is when this airplane was in for maintenance in the hangar, this work around these oxygen generators, this cabin work, was taking place over a month in duration. There was something on the order of 950 man hours expended inside that cabin. And when the cabin was done, the seats were back in, the supervisor called the crew in and they had a signature party because they had all these job cards that represented all the work that was done. And they had a signature party where they signed them off. You know, your signature is your bond. That's what you are. And all of those guys signed off all that paperwork at one time, whether they did the work or not. There was no effort meant to coordinate the sign-offs with the people who actually did the work. They just gave the people the thing, sign this, sign that, sign it. So that was the sign-off party that they had. And just remember and impress upon the mechanics that you come in contact with, especially the new guys, that their signature is them. That's their bond with aviation and society. And to guard their signature and don't abuse it. And I've used up my time. I want to thank you all for listening. And maybe someday we'll get to do a more extensive. I have as you can see, some of the presentations I ran through, especially ValueJet. I have hours and hours of presentations about maintenance failures in the process. So I just plead with all of you, please, please pay attention. Don't assume anything. Don't take any risks unnecessarily. If you can't find it in the manual and you don't know firsthand what it is, stop, reach out to somebody and try to get whatever information you need to make a good, sound judgment before you return an airplane to service. And again, thank you all for listening.